Hi, everyone. I'm June Klees of the Waging Dialogue Project, and I've got some good news for you. Did you know that right now across the country, thousands of individuals and organizations are DIYing our republic's democracy? They're part of a grassroots movement of movements called the United States Civic Wellness Movement of the early 21st century. Regardless of any or no political or ideological affiliations, these are the civically concerned members of We the People, and their numbers are growing by the day. As more and more Americans learn about their work and why it gives all of us hope in our country's ongoing experiment in democracy. On this, our first episode of DIYing America, you'll meet Vinay Orekondy, who is an attorney, mediator, organizer, and democracy advocate. With over 17 years of experience in movement building, he serves as co-chair of the Braver Network of Braver Angels, co-founder and partnership director of Better Together America and the Grand Bargain Project. He is a valued colleague and friend and a key leader in the United States civic wellness movement. I am happy to share with you a recent conversation that he and I had about Civic Hub building as part of DIYing America. Hello, everyone, and welcome to DIYing America. I'm your host, June Klees, and I am thrilled to have you with us on this exciting journey into the heart of Civic Hub building in America. This show, proudly produced by the Waging Dialogue Project, explores the innovative efforts of individuals and organizations working to create vibrant, connected communities across the country. Through each episode, we'll meet inspiring guests who are driving change, fostering collaboration, and building the hubs that strengthen the civic fabric of our nation. Their stories, experiences, and ideas offer valuable insights into how we all can contribute to a stronger, more unified America. Now, before we dive in, just a quick note, the views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the positions of Waging Dialogue or affiliated organizations. For our guests, please be aware that the event, of course, is being recorded, and by participating, you give Changing Our Consciousness, the parent organization of the Waging Dialogue Project, and Better Together America, unrestricted rights to use for recording for promotional and educational purposes. Thank you for being part of this ongoing conversation. Let's start DIYing America. Hello, Vinay. Welcome to the show.
Hi, June. Thanks so much for having me here.
So we're really excited to get started talking about what civic hubs are, and we will get into that for a deeper part of our conversation. But for today, or at least to get started anyway today, I want to sort of explore who you are in this journey. There's the work, and then there's the people who are doing the work. And I think it's really important that our audience understands who's out there, why they're doing this work, but also the inspiration behind what motivates them to do something as truly a labor of love, right? That we're seeing across this country. So I guess where I want to start is just dialing way back in time to the earliest days that you can remember. And I want to hear the stories about what in your youth inspired you or showed role models of positive civic action and what was capable that may have led you into this adulthood journey of looking after democracy.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I think for me, I've always kind of lived on the edge of political and civic work. In fact, a lot of my career was mostly political focused. And I think that but I've always been interested in the really great organizers in history. So so the Gandhis, the Martin Luther Kings, the Joan of Arcs, and I've always been interested in what they were doing because they were able to inspire mass movements that were like driven by this positive sense, right? Like, how is it that they were able to do that? It wasn't simply that they had a set of political goals. There was something else going on. They were tapping into the collective consciousness, almost trying to do something else, trying to lift society up and utilizing the political moment as a mechanism to do so.
Right.
So those figures have always been exciting for me about to see what they were, what they did, and yeah,
We had a little hiccup there on the recording. I'm
yeah.
just, the internet kind of paused on us. Just to kind of encapsulate the end, you were saying they were very inspiring because they're using a sense of awareness of sort of a larger picture to be able to then realize that there's a political moment through which greater change could be affected, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that's sort of those big figure kind of inspirations, right? I'm curious. So, you're from Australia, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so that makes this an interesting starting kind of conversation as it is. So when I think about, I'm trying to imagine Vinay as a small child, right? What did you see in your civic environment? So it's kind of going from that more of the broader inspirational figures, the people
Mhm.
around you that were engaged civically, whether that was an educator or somebody in your family or a neighbor or whatever it might be. What kinds of things in the civic environment for you growing up showed that kind of pathway that a person can take to be connected civically within their community, especially feet on the ground? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of things that come to mind. Probably the person that comes to mind most is my dad, actually, because he was very, very engaged, specifically with, so my background is Indian, from South India specifically, and he was extremely engaged in the Indian community in Australia. So he actually both the medical Indian community, but also just the Indian community more broadly.
Mhm.
And he was president of this organization. I think it's the largest Indian organization in the Southern Hemisphere. It was Australia based, and they ran this big sort of Indian festival in Australia every year.
Mhm.
And he's has never really stopped. Like he's just been doing that my entire life. I think the it was interesting because it was about like my view of community is a little different. Like I view um like he was heavily involved in a specific community. For me, community is less about, or my ideal vision of community is less about, you know, what your background is and more what your values are. And that's the sort of the community that I look to build. But I think probably from an early age, it was really normalized the idea of very high levels of civic engagement. Um,
Mm.
and I think just more broadly, it was interesting in the context of Australia because Australia is I think Australia is uncertain about its levels of civic engagement because um it can like much of the sort of the Western world over the last couple of decades, civic
Mhm.
engagement has declined significantly, and even connection has declined. So I think I saw that as normal, and I saw the Indian community, one which I didn't always share the values with. I want to be upfront. I didn't always share their values, but um, it was impressive how much they stuck together, right?
Mm.
And I see that now that desire to stick together in the face of hyper individualism is
Yeah.
something that can be applied more broadly. It's not something that needs to be restricted to, people of a certain background or whatever, but just how do we bring people's particular values together to rebuild the concept of community? So I think these are some of the strands that influence what I do now.
Absolutely. Wow. That's powerful when you think about how those lessons translate into your framework for where we're going to go with this work. So okay, how do you get from growing up in Australia to being a democracy advocate in the United States? Can you fill in that journey for us?
Certainly, certainly. So I've been in, as I mentioned, I've been in political work for a long time.
Mhm.
I work so for like close to 17 years. I was sort of on the mix between organizing work, political work, legal work, and kind of jumped around between the three. And and one thing I think I moved to the US about 5 years ago. I won the green card lottery a little bit unexpectedly. In fact, I didn't even know I was in it at the time. There's the whole story there.
Oh, we gotta come back to that sometime.
Yeah, yeah, but but I won that, and I think I, Australian politics is very, very subject to, and Australian society in general is very subject to what happens in the United States. So, I was actually interested, yeah, in seeing where the journey would take me. So I didn't have to accept the green card lottery, but I thought like this is an opportunity. Let me take it. Let me and see what happens. And I haven't looked back. It was the right choice, and I'm excited. I mean, I'm glad to be here. Um, and I think so I continued doing, when I moved here, I continued doing electoral work, but I very quickly realized just how toxic American politics is. Like it did not take long for me to see that. And I thought like I don't have enough rage in my soul to continue just like pouring into this. Like what am I doing here? Like, and so
Right.
that's when I made the switch to electoral reform.
Okay.
And I worked on ranked choice voting for the last couple of years. And now
Mhm.
I've my mission is much broader now, saying, okay, well, the the problem I see it now is the absence of community. Like that's what's causing a lot of the issues in American and global society, thanks to years of hyper individualism. So what I'm trying to do now is my work is on the intersection of democracy work and broader community building. Specifically, how do you build communities around democratic values, right? Small d democratic values. Like how do you what are the sort of values, the processes that hold them together? How do they interact with each other? What are their emotional relationships within such communities? What are things like that. Those are the questions that guide me now.
Absolutely. And the effects of hyper individualism being global are studied and understood. Of course, I even somewhat prophetically with was it Robert Putnam's book, right, Bowling Alone, and sort of predicting that this is the trajectory, even before really the internet did what the internet was capable of doing to the world. And so that there's an interesting energy I find in the people that I meet across the broader civic wellness movement who see what you're saying, that really this is, albeit that there is obviously strategy and tactics and methods being used in very precise ways. Ultimately, for the most part, what I get out of people is that this is our time to come together for building community through a revitalization of valuing democracy, especially when we understand globally that it's a shifting game all the time, and throughout history democracy has ebbed and it has flowed, and we have to be, as the basic principles of, again, lowercase d democracy, that we have to be participants, and that's that esprit de corps can allow us to if we engage at the community level, can allow us to find that community through being involved in our self-governing processes and our political culture, and healing, as you mentioned, the toxicity, right? The healing elements of that, but that has to come from within. And that's, I think, where I guess my next question is going to lead us a little bit, and then we'll segue more into the specifics about hubs and where the goals are in that. But I guess from within, we talked about influences, but if we had to tap into the heart of Vinay, the civic heart of Vinay, I guess I kind of want to see, we understand a sense of your journey. Where are you in the hope factor right now as you sit and you look at, despite all the challenges, everything that you're seeing out there that we all could be, catastrophic in our thinking about? And that's easy enough to do. And there are days we all fall into those, we're human, we're going to go there, right? But from the civic heart of hope that you might have, what is it that you see right now? Let's focus on the United States for a bit. Going on in this country that uplifts you and says, yeah, I need to continue along these lines. This is the work I would like to continue to sowing the seeds of love through, if you will.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great question. I'm actually incredibly hopeful at the moment, right? And I think that the reason I am is I think let's be real. No matter which way elections would have gone in 2024, I think democracy as it has been historically defined was in serious trouble. right? And um, the reason being is that I think that, like if there's a phrase that I heard once is that democracy requires a demos, right? It requires a people who are and I have a shared identity, and that shared identity is just gone or non-existent, really. So, um, what and I think as a result, democracy got outsourced to a set of institutions, right? And so what has happened now is I think for many people, in fact, for many institutionalists in particular, there's a huge wake-up call that's occurred. And so there's a realization that if you want democracy, you have to build the demos, right? You have to, and where does that going to occur? Certainly not going to occur on an institutional level. It's going to occur on a community level. And so, and it's hard. It's really, really hard to do that. It requires breaking out of habits of individualism. And individualism is like, it's not just a philosophy, it's like the way of existing, a way of
Right.
non-relating to one another, right? So I think the kind of the opportunity now is that because for many who were institutionalists, there's a shock to the system, which is now making many people think, well, how do we build these connective strands? So in this communitarian space we operate in, I've seen like it feels like a rocket has been attached to it, right? And I feel like so many other factors have been going on for a long time, like people coming out of the pandemic feeling isolated or things like that. They're all kind of converging on this desire for connectivity on a local level. So that's why I'm hopeful. I see almost an inevitability about it because of all these factors pushing us in this direction. But tell me, there was another part of your question.
Well, I kind of lost that thread. I actually want to
Oh,
pursue a little bit into
sure.
what you just said there, because I think it's fascinating. What you just described to me, at least in the way I kind of observe the world and think about the world from my perspective, is that individualism serves a purpose. Hyper individualism is not ideal. We understand that. But there's also something instinctual going on, right? I mean, as human beings, we are, some people might not like this phrase, but I'm going to use it anyway. Pack animals, right? We need each other. We need that community. And I think there's an instinctual, collective instinctual reaction that is sort of working toward the advantage of the communitarian perspective at this point in history. And you hear a lot more people speaking, even if they're not aware of the pro-democracy work and they're speaking about we need more volunteers, we need more community engagement, we need more connective tissue. Everybody's hurting for volunteers, right? We hear that over and over again, and from people I talk about all across the country. And earlier you said, this work can be used for that purpose. So let's dive into that a little bit more. Tell me a little bit more about what your thoughts are on how the pro-democracy work really threads in to communities. And I think that would be a good place to maybe even introduce the hub concept.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to answer that, I can tell you a little bit about how we got to the hub concept.
Yeah.
Right. Because and specifically on what you said everyone's hurting for volunteers, right? Um, so I told you I spent the last couple of years working in the ranked choice movement, and was doing coalitions work. And it struck me as really bizarre that the democracy movement more broadly was sort of quite fractured into lots of different movements, different things. And I was like, I don't understand why, because everyone has the same values. Why are we not really like working closely? And I've been in other movements that do work closely together, more ideologically driven ones, right? But
Sure.
they're often political machines, right? Like they're really good at training one another and supporting each other and organizing on the ground. I was like, okay. And you could argue that is what's contributed to polarization. So that's a whole other question. But clearly there's a need for a strong democracy movement in the United States. So what the founders of Better Together America, before we set it up, what we realized was that, okay, we not only to tie this movement together, in a way that we are supporting and helping one another, and can literally tap into each other's numbers, right? That has to start on a local level.
Right.
Right. That was because you can build coalitions forever, right? Like I've been in the nonprofit space for a long time. Coalitions come and go, and they're very transactional. But movement building is not. Movement is like true movements are communities, right?
Right.
Built on shared values, shared practices, shared cultures, even. And so how do we tap into this clear need for community at the moment, and at the same time build up the democracy movement? So
Right.
the way we started doing was this: okay, let's start pulling people together from across these democracy spaces on a local level, and get the activists together just to start with, on a very simple level, introducing them to each other, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then from there, let's start to see how we can use it as starting point in any number of localities to build out community, right, around those values. So if you've got a core of
Yeah.
people who have these values, you have the beginnings of broader community work, right, based on that. If that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Well, and it's reflected in some of the things I hear in the discussions that we all have. It's, for example, the coffee, what do you call it? Democracy coffee hour or something like that, or
Democracy happy hours, yeah.
yeah, the happy hour. And so that element of literally just saying, hi, you exist, let's talk.
Yeah,
And
and that's
those,
just, yeah.
no, as I say, those seem to be having a good element of, I like to use this work. I like to call this work sort of the glue of democracy, right? Because it's not a precise thing. It's relational, highly, highly relational work. But that seems to be working in along the lines of testimony to what you were saying about that people are craving this, right?
Yeah, and it's because, yeah, people are craving, like, how do I find people who have similar values and care about the same things as me, right? So but it is only the first step, to be clear. Like, the Civic Hub is not just a social thing, right?
I know.
And if you're just, I can tell you more about what the next steps would look like in a Civic
Yeah.
Hub. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we realize is that so what's the fundamental problem we're trying to solve here, right? And we thought, okay, we've got many individuals in a state of sort of isolation, and many are embracing even like extremist viewpoints and things because of that, right? And a lot of the violence in America you can attribute to this, like, hybrid individualism gone to extremes, right? Um, what we thought is, how can we take people as individuals from that state to a state of high level of civic engagement and community building? And what we realized is that all the organizations in this concept is called the ladder of engagement, right? Is that it's a set of steps, right, to take the people from that one state to the other. What we realized is that every organization in this space seems to have one rung of that ladder. So if we pull them together on a local level, and find a way for them to kind of coordinate, we can actually move people up this rung of the ladder, up the rungs of this ladder. So, yeah,
if I may, you're putting pieces of a puzzle together, right?
correct.
That's the synergy that ultimately will ideally, right, will bring together that local action. But please continue.
Yeah, and that's actually just hit on an interesting point there, is that we don't believe we're building anything. We're sewing a movement together that already exists. Right. And when I say that, like, the National Civic League put out a map that's got somewhere between 10 to 20,000 organizations on it. There's millions of people already active in this movement. We just haven't sewn it all together. So getting back to the ladder of engagement, the first step is social. Let's bring people together socially. Okay. And it's not just people in the democracy space, but people who are, and it's not just, like, we also want partisans there too, right? Like, of different, the important point is the diversity of partisan perspectives, right? Because you can be a non-partisan effort or a multi-partisan effort. And I think ultimately this movement is moving towards a multi-partisan effort, right? So bring them together socially, right? The next step is you do something like an act of service together, right? Let's go clean a park together, right? And there are many acts of service organizations such as AmeriCorps that operate in the space, right? Plus More Perfect Union, others as well, right? These are also graded by layers of complexity. So it's still a low lift, but it's a bit harder than a social event. The next level is bridging, right? Let's And that's more complex. Let's challenge each other's perspectives, right? Let's challenge each other's worldview and try and understand one another's worldview in the process. The next level is deliberative democracy. So now that we've kind of built relationships and understand each other, let's try and tackle some sort of problem, whether it be local, state, national, even international, together, right? Let's have expertise come in, hear multiple sides of and then actually come up with recommendations to help solve this problem. And the last step is action based on those recommendations. Right. So it might be advocacy, but it might be let's start a co-op. Who knows? Depends on the problem. So the idea being that someone who kind of goes up this rung is taken in a safe way from a state of like being isolated to a state of high civic engagement. Now, obviously, it's not meant to be a straight line. Like, people will start anywhere, different places, and but that's kind of the very general model for how we're thinking about this work and about how the parts fit together.
Right, and as you said, it's something that is not just a straight line. It's going to feed on itself, right? Because at some point you're going to have to go back to the community element and keep that fresh and keep that vibrant so that you can keep onboarding, folks, but also just to keep your own cohesion. And also to have that public presence, the service element really goes a long way. We're going to clean up a park and we're going to sit there, we're going to do our thing. And then somebody might say, hey, what are y'all doing there today? And then we could say, we're cleaning the park and this is why and who we are. And then the next thing, maybe that person sparked, or if nothing else, that person tells somebody else that goes, what are they doing? We forget about that. You don't have to always, I think in building things or weaving and knitting, as we're saying, it's sometimes it's not that initial person of contact. It's the person that hears through the second, the third wave and goes, wait, let me figure out who that is and let me circle in. And it just ideally keeps building from there. So in relationship to that, we're as you're seeing this unfolding now. So tell me, if you would, tell our audience a little bit more concretely about where there's hubs right now, what you see going on. Give us that sort of, national sort of picture of what's happening with hubs.
Yeah, so the hubs are emerging both on a local and state level, right? And so the state level, it's a little bit different. There's a lot of it is more about the incubation of local hubs and also about activity that may not be you can't do on a local level, like such as like legislative coordination and things like that. But we've got like I'm in Washington, DC. We've got a hub here, and we've been that first activity, that social level, has actually been going on for a couple of years. We've been running a democracy drinks here for some time, but there's been hubs emerging across the country, really, in city areas, rural areas. As I mentioned, a couple of states have popped up, but we're seeing lots of hubs starting to emerge is through partnerships, organizational partnerships, where all it takes to set up a hub really is someone who wants to support the civic health of their locality, right? It could just take one individual who wants to do that, right? What we've found is that very often those individuals are already involved in some sort of civic activity, like with one of the existing organizations. And so what they'll do is we're saying to them, say, look, okay, you're part of that one organization. Would you like to help set up the framework for the whole ecosystem? So in approaching national organizations that have chapters in many places, and giving them that option, the hubs are like all they have to do is say, yes, we in our locality, we want to help convene the ecosystem together in that locality, right? To get this ladder of engagement going and get our people together to begin with. So because it's so easy, right? It's so easy to get this going, it's scaling really, really fast. Like there will be, like, I think within a year we'll have a couple of hundred hubs, I think. Yeah, and then the key then is like, how do we support the hubs in being able to convene their localities? Yeah, so yeah, it's exciting, and it's like everyone just gets it, and they're like, why haven't we been doing it all this time? So
Which is a good reaction to have, because it's showing that there's a connection to like, oh, I have this energy and here we go. I have a place for it now. So okay, so let's imagine this, right? Somebody is watching what we're talking about now, and they're like, oh yeah, that's kind of what I'm tapping into. This is what I'm feeling, and I live, wherever in America, right? What would you suggest for somebody who's curious, if nothing else? What would be some suggestions to them about how they might connect into understanding what's going on and what kind of resources are being built, exist and being built for our hubs and the work that people are doing across this country?
yeah, the first thing I suggest they do is contact Better Together America, and contact our director of hub support, Caleb, my colleague, and one of
Right?
our co-founders. And what he would do is he would introduce you to a couple of things. Is that first is that um, in whatever locality you're in, it will first is, are you a member of an existing local organization or not? We'd have to determine that, and it's fine either way. If you are, great. If you're not, fine too.
Right.
And the key is to plug you in to well, first have knowledge of all the other organizations in your locality. That's the absolute first step. And there we can get that information through the National Civic Leagues map and through some
Mhm.
of our own connections, right? So who else in the democracy and civic health ecosystem is in your area, in your town,
Right. Right.
or,
Because
or
a
or
lot of people
section?
don't know. A lot of
Yeah,
people don't know. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
even in the space until the map was done, like most of us didn't know, right?
Right.
Like so that's why it's so powerful, right? And the second is that what you'd probably do is join Caleb's learning cohort, right? So a lot of the other hubs are currently already meeting to share best practices and ideas with each other and learn together, because the model is still in development and it will be for, well, forever really.
Right. Right.
But we're still early in that part of the journey. So I think that much of the theory and practice of hubs is being developed in that learning cohort. And they meet weekly, so and there's also opportunities to meet outside of that if you want more support. So that's, you do that, and I think that's fabulous. You'd also get access to the resource center, and what the resource center is that we're well the resource center team is stitching together um all the really the resources across the entire movement, anything that is publicly available, and even some things that they've released for use by the resource center,
Mhm.
saying, well, how can we, that can be used in hub building, right?
Right.
Because if hubs are at their core sort of constituted by the different individual parts of the movement, then all of that material is going to be useful, right?
Right.
So there is documentation already on how to do that big picture, let's start a hub, but there's also endless documentation and ideas out there about how to do different projects within a hub. Like, let's say, hey, how do you run a social event? How do you
Right.
run a through to how do you run a citizens assembly? Through to how do you organize? How do you lobby your local council around those recommendations you come up with? How do you do an active service and so forth?
Well, it's sort of almost what I think the resource center is, and of course I'm on that work and doing that work, and this is part of this work, right? But to me, it's like when you walk into a restaurant and they have that menu up there, and you already have a sense of your limitations, whether you have dietary limitations, do you have this, do you have that, what your preferences are, and that's going to be built locally, right? As a result of this connective tissue that people are literally forming together, and then what the hub, as I see it, offers is this menu of, yeah, we're working on this. Ah, that's going to help. Oh, yeah, here's this that's going to help. And of course, being able to then go to the support group for the work, Caleb's work, it allows people then to talk about how that's going and the things that are working, the things that aren't, help each other overcome challenges so that the longevity is of what is trying to be built, and the support for communities is going to be ongoing and ideally will outlive all of us, right? So that this is an ongoing, this is not a one-off for our era, but rather something hopefully that in 200-300 years, people will be saying, hey, look what those people did. And it's still more or less, still continuing. I'm sure it'll evolve and change, but it's more or less the spirit of that esprit de corps that's bringing people together, not only nationally, but like in the broader to create these tools, but then the precise local, hubs themselves continuing to operate and sustain over time, which is obviously the long-term objective, is to see democracy survive into the future in a healthy and thriving way. So with that in mind, and just sort of thinking about time here a little bit, I feel like we could keep going. There's so much more I want to pick your brain on. And of course, we're going to have you back, right? This is an ongoing journey. We're sort of treating this as a living series where we're going to hear the stories of the different hub builders. We're going to learn a little bit about their fears and their struggles as they go along the way, because we want to be as useful to the viewers who are engaged, not only just in general to learn, but actually doing the work of hub building. And so this was a great start, Vinay. You laid it out. We've got a good sense of perspective on it. But kind of thinking it in a real individual sense. Two more questions. One, what are some of the critical tips that you would or steps? Let's say tips. We'll just call it tips to start with, for somebody to take in that, both the inward element of going into this work, because there is a vulnerability that you have to address when you get into this work. So some critical tips on that front for somebody who's thinking about, yeah, I think I might want to venture into this hub building. How do you coach people on that? Let's look sort of more of that interrelational element of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that I'd say that one of the things is don't wait for anyone else to do it, right? Like that's the first thing, is that, because I think that we can often have our doubts and fears and say, well, there's someone else who will be better suited to this. The truth is that you are that someone else, because that someone else also has doubts and fears and insecurities, right?
Yeah.
And it's that someone else is going to be one of your neighbors. Now, unless there's, and that even if you do have some in your locality, do have some like fabulous champion of all this, they can't do it alone, right? Because that's not community, right? Like, community literally is not one person doing it alone. Like, that's the idea is all of us doing it together. So you don't, and by the same token, you don't have to do this alone, right?
Right.
Like the very first step here isn't like if you're worried about your time commitments or just or I mentioned ability, if you're worried about time commitments or anything like that, the very first step is convening people who will help you, right? And again, it's you're doing, and some people, that's what they want to do, is they say, okay, my job is to convene people. Maybe I don't want to do some of the other parts of it, like, so I don't want to organize or whatever. That's fine, but let me pull the people together and give them the connective tissue. And that's often something that I do. Like, I mean, I do organizing things, but I've realized the thing I love doing most in the world is convening people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm a stitcher, right? I stitch people together. So that's what I focused on, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
and whatever aspect, if you're good at one particular thing or really passionate about one part of this, then that's great too, right? Because you've got a part to play in this larger picture, right? Because once we've brought people together, okay, well then what's the meaningful action going to take, and all of the skills are going to be required, right? And if you've never done anything like this before, you're exactly who we want involved as well. Right?
Yeah.
Which let's be honest, is most people, right?
Most
so
people.
yeah, so let's, now is the time. If it feels like, okay, this is completely alien or foreign to me, we will help you, right? We'll help you every step of the way. We've got the resources. We're figuring this out together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So come and add your, and in fact, sometimes it's almost better to not be from a kind of a political background or anything like that, because that stuff can blindside you as to what reality is. So long story short, no matter what your doubts, no matter what your insecurities or fears about this work, on an individual level, come and we'll help you, right? And we'll help you help everyone else.
Right, exactly. And you don't even, a lot of it too can get sort of academic-y. Try not to be put off by that. That's part of what comes with the turf, but it isn't really what the work ultimately is. And I think that's another piece, and to know that we're the agents of change, right? We're the now, we're the here and the now. There's an author that I like to reflect on a lot. His name is Paul McElroy. He's from the mid 20th century, and a lot of his writings. And he talks about how we are the living bridge, right? We're the living bridge. We're the now, and we take all that is of value from the past, and we are the ones to decide how we're going to preserve that into the future. And that, to me, is exactly the work of what our democracy hubs are seeking to do at this time in history. I really would love to spend more time talking with you about the DC Hub and your colleagues there. And I think we should do that in a future episode, have you all kind of on and talk about what's going on in DC specifically. But I think that for a first layout to just get what is happening, Vinay, thank you so much for being our first guest on the show. And I look forward to having you back, and your wisdom today was just very valuable, I'm sure, for people trying to understand what exactly is going on with hub building in America, these civic hubs, right? So thank you all for joining us today. Again, thank you to Vinay. We look forward to when we will see you next on DIYing America.